I never imagined it would end like this, trapped in a house I thought I knew with a man I thought I could trust, as everything around me unraveled beyond comprehension. It all began with a whisper, a quiet, terrifying whisper that cut through the air like a blade. "They're here." I turned to him, my fiancé, Blake. He was standing by the window, his back to me, staring outside with an intensity one had never seen in him before. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of disbelief and pure terror. I didn't even have time to ask what he meant. I didn't have time to process it, because before I could say a word, the house itself seemed to react. The walls trembled, and the air became heavier, thicker, as though something was pressing in from all directions. I followed his gaze to the window. At first I didn't see anything. The sky was dark, heavy clouds rolling in, and the trees outside swayed gently in the wind. But then I felt it, something was wrong. My body stiffened, my heart began to race, and my breath quickened as I saw the shadows move, slithering against the walls of the house, creeping toward the windows. It was the kind of feeling you get right before something terrible happens. The kind of tension that fills the air, making it impossible to breathe, impossible to think. The wind picked up, the trees outside bending violently in a way that wasn't natural, as though they were being pulled toward the house. And then they came. A dark cloud, swirling and twisting, filled the window, blocking out the last light of the evening. First it looked like smoke, black, suffocating, inky and thick. But then I saw them. Faces. Countless eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness. And as the cloud began to press against the glass, I realized it wasn't just smoke. They were spectral demons, twisted, wailing creatures with hollow, empty eyes, their forms flickering in and out of reality, as if they were made of the very shadows themselves. The glass of the window cracked, spiderwebbing with tiny fractures as their shapes pressed against it. Their chilling whispers seeping through the cracks. Froze. I couldn't move. My mouth went dry, my heart hammering against my chest, a cold sweat breaking out across my back. Blake was beside me now, his hand on my shoulder, but he wasn't looking at me. His gaze was locked on the window, his face pale and contorted with fear. "They're here," he whispered again, this time with a tremor in his voice. The house groaned beneath us, the wood creaking, the walls bending inward as though the very structure of the place was being warped by some outside force. I could feel it, like a pressure building, suffocating the air, making it hard to breathe, making it feel as though the house itself was alive and hungry. "What are they?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, my throat tight with terror. Blake didn't answer at first. Instead, he took a deep breath, as though gathering himself before. He turned to me, his eyes wide, his lips pressed together in a grim line. "They're demons," he said, his voice low, shaky. "Ancient spirits. I've been researching them for months now. I thought I could stop them. I thought I could keep us safe." The words hit me like a wave of ice water, and I felt my stomach drop. Blake had been researching demons. Had he known about this? Had he known they were coming? But I couldn't process it. Not now. Not with those things, those creatures pressing against the windows, their distorted forms shuddering in the dark, their eyes glowing brighter with each passing second. Blake's grip tightened on my arm. "We need to get to the basement. Now." I nodded numbly, my brain struggling to catch up with the situation, but the terror of it all made it hard to think. I didn't even know where to start. My legs felt like jelly, and as Blake pulled me toward the stairs, I heard it, soft at first, then growing louder, echoing through the house. The sound of scratching, scraping against the floorboards, like claws or talons dragging across. The basement door was at the bottom of the stairs. It was a small, dimly lit room, nothing special, nothing too frightening. But now, with the sounds growing louder behind us, I had never felt more afraid of it in my life. We reached the basement door, But as Blake tried to open it, the door wouldn't budge. It was stuck jammed shut. Blake cursed under his breath and tried again, harder this time. His shoulder slammed into the door, but it didn't move. The scratching, that infernal sound, grew louder and louder. "What the hell is going on?" I whispered, panic rising in my chest. "Blake, what's happening?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were wide, filled with dread as he tried to force the door open, shoving against it with everything he had. But the door wouldn't budge. It was like it had been locked from the other side, sealed shut by some invisible force. Behind us, the sound of the creatures grew louder, and suddenly I heard a crash, a loud, violent noise from upstairs. The house groaned again, and I could feel it now. The very foundation beneath us trembled. I turned to Blake, my heart racing. "They're inside," I said, my voice a sharp gasp. "They're in the house." Blake's face twisted with fear as he took my hand and pulled me back. "We can't stay here. We need to." But before he could finish, the entire house seemed to lurch, shaking violently as if it was being torn apart from the inside. I stumbled back, my legs giving way beneath me as the floor trembled beneath our feet. "No, no, no," Blake whispered, his eyes wide with terror as he pulled me back into the hallway, away from the basement door. "We have to get out of here. Now." But the moment I stepped into the hallway, I saw them. More of them. The demons. They were pouring in through the walls, emerging from the cracks, their forms flickering, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light as they floated toward us. Their faces twisted with rage, their bodies contorted in unnatural shapes, like puppets on invisible strings. The room around us seemed to bend and warp as they moved closer. The house was no longer just a house. It was a vessel, a prison, holding us in the grip of something far worse than any of us could have imagined. "Blake," I gasped, fear filling my voice. "What do we do? What do we do?" He didn't answer me. Instead, his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist, pulling me toward the back. But before we could get more than a few steps, the demons were there, filling the hallway. Their cold, empty eyes locking onto us, their mouths opening wide in terrible, unnatural grins. "Blake, stop. There's no way out," he said, his voice shaking. "We're trapped. Already found us." I felt the blood drain from my face as the creatures closed in, their bodies floating through the air, their arms extending toward us, reaching for us with fingers that ended in sharp, claw-like. Suddenly, there was a crackling sound, and the air itself seemed to shift, pulling us in different directions. I felt something tugging at my very soul, pulling me toward them. My body froze in place, and I could feel the coldness, the death, creeping into every fiber of my being. "They're here," Blake whispered again, his voice barely audible, the terror in his eyes now matching the absolute hopelessness in my heart. But as I stood there, paralyzed by fear, something inside me snapped, something deep and primal. A voice, small at first, began to speak in the back of my mind. "We fight." It was just a whisper, but it was enough. It was the spark that ignited the flame. I couldn't wait for Blake to figure it out. I couldn't let these things win. "We fight," I said, my voice shaking but stronger now. "We fight." Blake looked at me, his face torn with the weight of everything that had just happened. But he nodded, his eyes hardening. "We fight." We turned to face the creatures, ready to do whatever we could. Because if we didn't fight now, we wouldn't get a chance to fight later. And in that moment, I realized that whatever was happening, it wasn't just about survival. It was about facing the very thing that had come for us. And it was about fighting back. The creatures in the hallway weren't just standing still anymore. Their forms were swirling, flickering in and out of reality like a bad dream. It was as if they were feeding off the fear that saturated the house, becoming stronger, more solid with every passing second. Their eyes, those terrible empty eyes, locked onto us, and I could feel the weight of their gaze. Pressure against my chest that was almost suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Felt like the very air was thick with darkness, and I couldn't escape it. But then Blake stepped forward, his face set in determination, though his body was still trembling with fear. He pulled me behind him, his hand clutching mine with an urgency that made my pulse quicken. I didn't know what he was planning, but I didn't care. All I knew was that I had to follow him. We had no other choice. "We have to get out of here," he said, his voice shaky but steady. "We need to find a way out of this place." But the words didn't sound right. The house, this house, wasn't just a building anymore. It had become something else, something alive. It wasn't just shelter. It was part of the darkness now. Part of whatever was controlling those creatures. We weren't running away from them, we were running from everything that had turned against us. And the house. It was the prison. Blake led the way through the hallway, and I followed closely, my feet heavy, my heart pounding. In my chest, the creatures, demons, followed us, but not in the way I expected. They weren't charging after us. Instead, they floated, their movements almost hypnotic, like they were toying with us, letting us think we had a chance to escape. I glanced back at Blake, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "What do we do, Blake? Can we do?" He didn't answer right away. He was scanning the hallway, his eyes darting from one shadow to the next, as if searching for an escape route. He looked as if he were piecing something together, something that I couldn't see, something that might give us a chance to survive. Then, in a quiet, almost reverent tone, he spoke. "There's something in the basement. Something that could stop them." My chest tightened at his words. The basement. "Blake, we're not going back down there. We're not going anywhere near that thing." But Blake's eyes were fixed on me, the same eyes I had trusted for so long, filled with a mixture of fear and certainty. I know it's not safe, but it's the only place. It's the only way." I shook my head, trying to fight the fear gnawing at my insides. "We don't even know what we're dealing with. How do you know this will work?" "I don't," he said, voice tight. "But I do know that we have no other choice." The shadows around us seemed to flicker again, growing darker with each passing second, the demons inching closer, their forms coiling like snakes, waiting to strike. The air felt colder now, colder than it had ever been, as if the house itself had taken on a malevolent life of its own. The walls seemed to shift, breathing, alive, pulling us into their grasp. Blake's hand tightened around mine. "We need to move. Now." He turned and started heading toward the basement door, but just as we reached it, a low, guttural growl filled the room, a noise that came from deep within the house, from somewhere far darker than any of us could imagine. The sound rattled the very foundation of the house, shaking the walls and making the floor beneath us tremble. The shadows around us deepened, swirling faster, closing in on us, filling the space with an energy I couldn't even comprehend. Before I could react, I saw it, the thing that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting, watching. A figure emerged from the darkness, its form tall, its limbs long and thin, its body twisted in unnatural ways. Its face was hidden in shadow, but the eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. Black, me, infinite. It was the leader, the one that had been calling the others, the one that had been feeding on our fear. And it wasn't alone. More creatures, more of those spectral demons, flooded into the hallway, filling the space with an unholy mass. Their forms flickered and writhed, and the air grew thick with their presence. The growl that echoed through the house was now a chorus, a symphony of deep, guttural voices that seemed to resonate with the very structure of the house itself. My heart raced, my breath coming in shallow gasps. We were surrounded. There was nowhere to run. The basement had become the last place of hope, and it was now the only place where we could escape, even for a moment. Blake pulled me toward the door, his hands shaking, but his resolve unshaken. He didn't stop. He couldn't. And neither could I. The demons were closing in, their dark eyes glowing brighter with each step. "We're not going down without a fight," Blake muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible, over the roar of the creatures. "We're not letting them win." I didn't know what he was planning, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him face this alone. Not after everything. Not after everything we had been through. We had to fight. I turned to face the creatures, my pulse pounding in my ears, my legs trembling beneath me. My heart threatened to tear itself from my chest. But I couldn't back down now. I couldn't let them win. As Blake fumbled for the basement door, the creatures surged forward, their bodies undulating, like black waves filling the space around us. Their glowing eyes were fixed on us, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. The shadows closed in faster, suffocating the air, pushing us toward the door, toward the only hope we had left. But something inside me snapped. I didn't know what it was. A primal instinct, a surge of adrenaline, a moment of clarity. I grabbed Blake's arm and pulled him away from the door. He looked at me, his eyes wide with confusion, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. "We need to take them head on," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We have to face them." Blake's eyes searched mine, his lips pressing into a thin line. How are we supposed to face them? But I didn't have the answer. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a weapon. All I had was a desperate desire to survive, to protect the people I loved. And I wasn't about to let these monsters take us without a fight. The lead demon, the one with the glowing eyes, took a step toward us, its form flickering in and out of existence. The room seemed to warp around us, the walls breathing, the floor shifting. The house had become the thing's playground, and we were the prey. But Blake didn't hesitate. He grabbed the first thing he could, an old rusted pipe that had been left in the corner, and swung it toward the closest demon. His face grim but determined. "Get ready," he said through gritted teeth. "We fight together." And in that moment, I realized that we didn't need a plan. We didn't need weapons. We had each other. And that was all we needed to survive. I grabbed a piece of broken wood from the ground, my fingers wrapping around it, feeling the weight of it in my hands. We would fight. We would survive. The first demon lunged at us, its mouth opening wide, a scream echoing through the house. Before it could reach us, Blake swung the pipe with everything he had, hitting it square in the chest. The creature screeched, its body crumpling as it faded into the shadows. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. But as we stood there, in the heart of that storm of shadows and whispers, I knew one thing: we weren't going down without a fight.